our webinar on trees. Um, we are gonna get started. My name is Dira Johaniff, and I'm the Senior Climate Resilience Manager with Charles River Watershed Association. I'm here today with my colleague Ari, who's our amazing Senior Community Organizer. And we're really excited to present tonight, CRWA's overall work around trees, but specifically on our newly published regional tree protection and expansion plan and resources for you to help us grow our climate resilience through trees. This is tonight's agenda covering project background. We'll go over the recommended strategies and how we can work together to strengthen local tree regulations. As you can see, we will have a Q&A at the end, but if you have questions throughout the presentation, please send them to Ari or myself in the chat. It's currently set to just sending chats to myself and Ari, and we will answer them during the Q&A session. Before I pass it over, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. Charles River Watershed Association would like to acknowledge that here in our watershed, we are on sacred land that was stolen and holds a history of violence and slavery. We recognize the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag peoples as the traditional stewards of this watershed land, and we honor the legacy of life, knowledge, and skills stolen due to violence and colonization as we do our work. And with that, I will pass it to Ari.
Thank you, Dira. So as Dira said, my name is Arana Proya, and I am our senior community organizer at CRWA. And before we kind of dig in tonight, I'm going to do a little background. For those who may not be familiar with the Charles River Watershed Association, or CRWA, we have been around since 1965, and we are an environmental advocacy organization working towards protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. Like many urban rivers in the country, the Charles River has been historically contaminated with factory waste, chemical waste, and the creation of dams, resulting in poor water quality and aquatic habitat. Our work continues to focus on ensuring that the river and its watershed is healthy. And as you can see on our slide here today, we have an 80-mile long river that covers 308 square miles of watershed. That comes out to about 35 cities and towns with over 1 million residents, and 60% of those residents are in environmental justice neighborhoods, primarily in our lower watershed. One of the things we like to say at CRWA is that we take this watershed view approach because what is happening upstream doesn't always stay upstream, and water knows no municipal bounds. So we are really an organization that likes to work throughout the whole watershed. And with that, Dara, you can move to the next slide. As an organization, we do our mission through 5 program areas, which is climate resilience, river restoration, river science, stormwater solutions, and education and outreach. Some key activities include removing defunct dams, collecting water quality, and implementing green stormwater infrastructure all throughout our watershed. And next slide. And the overarching goal of the climate resilience program area that I just mentioned is to really help communities prepare for the impacts of extreme heat, precipitation, and drought. Our focus is to arm watershed residents and local elected officials with the resources. Aligning with our mission, some of the topics we focus on include stormwater runoff, wetlands, invasive species, and of course, trees, which is what we're here to talk to you about tonight. As the senior community organizer at CRWA, one of my main responsibility is to help facilitate and be a resource to elected officials and residents when it comes to implementing and advocating for climate resilient policies in a community. I'm here to ensure that communities feel empowered and supported to advocating for a more climate resilient future. You can see up here a screenshot of our Climate Resilient 101 webpage. We have a beautiful toolkit that covers a bunch of different stuff and also covers our local tree code toolkit that we'll talk about a little bit later. And hit next slide, Dara. I'm sure many of us here are familiar with the benefits of trees, but this slide is to really underscore the multiple and co-benefits of having trees in our environment to address the climate impacts we are experiencing with climate change, including stormwater and urban heat islands, as we mentioned earlier. So as you can see on this slide, between shading and cooling, carbon sequestration, wildlife habitat, improving water quality, stormwater control, and erosion control, trees have many benefits in our communities. And one of the key roles that we're going to talk about tonight is how we can protect and bolster that in our communities. And with that, I'm going to hand that over to Dira.
Great. Thanks, Ari. And I'm going to apologize ahead in case I have to cough or sneeze. I'm under the weather today. So as Ari mentioned earlier, our organization, approaches climate resilience at the watershed scale, and that's especially important in Massachusetts, where we don't have a strong regional or county level governance. And so most climate planning happens town by town, even though, climate impacts don't stop at the municipal boundaries. So back in 2019, we really saw that gap clearly in the work that we did, and that's why we helped establish the Charles River Climate Compact, or the CRCC. It is a partnership of 28 cities and towns across the watershed, created so that communities could coordinate, share resources, and act collectively instead of in isolation, as some of them might have to do with climate planning. And the CRCC's mission is to work collaboratively to increase climate resilience for people and the natural ecosystem in the Charles River watershed by taking that regional approach to implementing solutions addressing, the extreme heat, the drought, flooding through multiple avenues of funding, planning, and also policy changes. You can go to our page to learn more about our other regional scale project that focuses specifically on addressing flood impacts. But the mission of our collaborative and the interest of Climate Compact members ultimately led us to the project we're talking about tonight. And, it's really a direct example of how shared priorities between municipalities and regional thinking can turn into on-the-ground action that benefits the entire watershed. And I know I see some familiar faces, so I know some or maybe most of you today have already been to previous webinars of ours on this project and maybe have engaged in our surveys, and thank you for that. But for those that are new to the project, CRWA, the CRCC, and our amazing consultants, Corcoran Environmental, and I can see Claire in the audience, and I think I saw Chad as well, have been hard at work for the past 2-ish years to put together the regional tree protection and planting plan. As you can see, I have a screenshot of the final plan here, but as you can see from the table of contents, this plan encompasses an overview of the planning process that we did for the project, a summary of existing conditions report for tree canopy in our watershed, which I'll also cover in a little bit, and the recommendations we have compiled based on the engagement results, with our municipalities as well as watershed residents, and feedback from our technical advisory committee. And this plan is really to provide a central resource to help municipalities and residents maximize the health and benefits of existing trees, help protect trees from, invasive species and other threats, and also identify new opportunities for tree planting to ensure a robust, healthy tree population. And the plan recommendations are organized in 3 categories: protection, planting, and maintenance of trees, to encompass, the holistic overview of tree management. And recommendations in this plan, as we go through them, are not isolated from one another, but rather a compilation of actions that can be implemented or used as a guide in various aspects of community regulations, planning, or management practices. So I'm going to go cover some of our existing conditions briefly to kind of set up the stage for us. And we do have more resources on our website and a story map that kind of covers the full breadth of existing conditions of tree canopy in our watershed. But in 2024, our team's analysis of existing conditions of tree canopy did show us that, tree canopy is not evenly distributed across the watershed. And we did see that most canopy is currently concentrated in the upper and middle watershed, which kind of had an average a 59% canopy by town in the upper and middle watershed versus an average of 33%, which we saw in the lower watershed, so our more urbanized area. The report also showed us that watershed municipalities have lost an average of 6.9% canopy by town across the watershed between 2008 and 2021, with the majority of that loss occurring between 2012 and 2017. And as you look at the numbers here, it is important to note that the canopy loss that we did see that's highest in were in towns with small proportions of land in the watershed. So you'll see at the left or the right end of that graph, Foxborough, Mendon, and Ashland. But that's really kind of a result of the way we did our analysis, which was only looking at land within our watershed boundary. So it doesn't account for the full town area. But even so, as you guys can see on this graph, it does still show significant tree loss that's occurring in areas across our watershed. And so in conjunction with doing that existing conditions analysis, we also did ask, all of you, our watershed residents, about your thoughts and experiences and ideas about trees and growing our tree canopy through 2 surveys throughout our planning process. And the full survey results you'll be able to find them in the appendix of this plan. But from that survey, over 70% of you shared that you thought there were not enough trees in your community, and that the top challenges of planting tree in your community were due to lack of space, insufficient funding, and also lack of community interest or awareness, and of course, maintenance. Our second survey that we had shared out had asked you all to help us figure out how to prioritize planting and protection efforts. And as you can see, we also got a lot of great insights from those responses. And so based on all of the engagement results and our existing conditions, we started off in this plan with a general recommendation for communities that don't already have it, which is to use this regional plan as a basis to develop and adopt an urban forest plan in the coming years. Urban forest plans, if you're not familiar, are widely recognized as kind of the foundation for protecting, expanding and maintaining a healthy tree canopy, because, they also allow communities to set goals that reflect your local community characteristics, current tree conditions and priorities that you set together. And these plans are typically developed by arborists or urban foresters with input from the community, and include a canopy assessment like we did, but at a more granular scale. Plus, many of the recommendations that we have in our plan related to, protecting, planting, and maintaining trees. One of the critical benefits of having an urban forest plan is also helping the community set up metrics related to forestry. And typically, it also helps set up a community to build partnerships and also, unlock more funding opportunities. On that note, we do know that not every town has the capacity to take one on for a number of reasons. So the recommendations that we have in this plan and that we've broken up into the 3 categories are actions that can be taken in smaller scales, but still make an impact. And so starting off with protection strategies, because obviously retaining existing canopy, especially large or historic trees, is an essential component of canopy health, as it can take decades, for a newly planted tree to attain a large canopy and also have the same level of co-benefits that Ari had gone over earlier. And so protection of trees is, critical to also having a more diverse distribution of tree population, especially as we're looking, to have trees in a healthy watershed that is able to adapt to our current, our changing climate. And in this plan, we do look at protection in different forms. And so it can come, in the range of policies that might require your short-term, physical protection during construction, or it could also be in the form of, permanent legal protection in the form of like land or forest conservation. And as some of you may recall from past webinars, we have listed our recommendations in this plan by, for public trees and private trees, or we've set it up to look at those separately. And so you can see on this table, it shows a summary of those strategies, categorized in those three buckets, where you can look at tree bylaw or ordinances for both public and private trees, how we could increase land protection through creating new parks or town forests for public versus new conservation areas for private trees, or looking at, using a strategy that utilizes other town or city regulations like zoning or stormwater or wetlands regulations that can directly or indirectly protect trees in that jurisdiction, like expanding your wetland buffers that could add more trees into that protection. And so the setup that we have in the plan, you'll see the layout reflecting the list of recommendations, but with more details on how it applies. And, when available, we've included examples from local or regional contexts. And throughout the plan, we've also highlighted some call-out pages with case studies or an extended explanation of certain topics. For example, in our protection chapter, a call out on tree ordinances, and we've highlighted this, a couple of case studies, some from Florida that talks about the effectiveness of private tree ordinances. And while we're actually on this topic, I'm going to quickly pass it back to Ari to talk a little bit more about tree ordinances and bylaws, because it's such a critical component of our plan, and also how CRWA can support your town or city to adopt one.
Thanks, Dara. So quick background for those who may not know kind of what is a tree protection bylaw or ordinance. So a tree bylaw or ordinance in Massachusetts is a local law that's implemented by your town government that protects and manages trees specifically in the bounds of your municipality. Oftentimes we see this requiring permits to remove or trim public trees, and it may include rules for planting trees in new developments. Some regulations also protect trees on private property near roads or important areas. But overall, the goal of a tree protection bylaw or ordinance is to preserve trees, encourage planting, and ensure proper care to improve the environment and community quality of life. And then, dear, if you don't mind going to the next slide. And kind of some of these, I'm going to highlight on this slide two key tools for stronger tree protection. On the CRWA's Climate Resilience 101 page that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have this toolkit that we talk about. And two of these key tools that we have are the tree protection through local code CRWA recommendations. So as an organization, we have taken a look at kind of best practices through our watershed and developed some key recommendations. Some of those start as strong tree bylaws, just clearly defining which trees are protected and prioritized, really heavily emphasizing on protecting and prioritizing mature trees because their climate and flood benefits can't be replaced quickly. We also advocate that protection needs to extend to private property where most canopy loss is occurring. When trees are removed, we recommend that permit mitigation through either you can replace trees or you can pay into a tree fund. This helps maintain overall canopy while still allowing for exemption for hazardous trees. And that's all on this. There's a lot more in there, but I just wanted to highlight some of those key parts. But this is a document that we are able to arm elected officials and residents to help them advocate and make changes in their own town. And this on the right side, the CRWA tree bylaw matrix. This is a new tool we've just kind of established and published this fall. This was compiled of all 35 cities and towns tree bylaw or tree ordinance matrix, where we evaluate and we identify what each community in our watershed has for a tree bylaw or tree ordinance, or if they are regulating through a scenic road bylaw or regulating through their stormwater regulations. We are trying to track and identify how towns are taking this next step in tree protection. And it's a really cool tool. So you're able to go onto CRWA's Climate Resilience 101 page, look up your town. I'll use my hometown of Newton as an example. You can go look at Newton and see what their MVP status, do they have a tree committee or a tree warden, and a bunch of other things that kind of help us evaluate where our communities are sitting with tree protection. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Ari. And maybe if you don't mind sharing the website link in the chat so folks
Yep.
know where to find this resource. All right. So moving on to the next recommendation strategy in our regional plan, which is our planting or expansion strategies. And so obviously after kind of retaining and maintaining as much of our current tree canopy as possible, tree planting is the next best way to expand our communities or the watershed's canopy cover, and also to ensure that future canopy is in place as existing mature trees age. And so this section really highlights strategies that can be taken while considering the fact that trees often compete with, for space with other critical social infrastructure, such as new housing, maybe parking, and underground utilities as well. And we know that finding space in already crowded streets is challenging, but it's not impossible, and it can be done when we think creatively and when we partner and coordinate across departments and organizations efficiently. And so the strategies really focus, some of the strategies that we listen here focus on adopting regulations that incentivize planting trees, for example, in or development projects or throughout your stormwater or wetland regulations, which is, believe included as part of our toolkit that Ari had included. Or it could look like requiring replacement in your tree bylaw ordinances in the case that any tree removal happens. We've also highlighted some strategies that focus on, and this is kind of where the term expansion comes in, where it's focusing on how to just focus on the larger kind of funding needs and our barriers to actually do planting work. Because sometimes it might not be the space that's the barrier. It might actually just be the funding, or sometimes even awareness or want for it. And so thinking about, public-private partnerships or establishing maybe a giveaway for residents. And then there were some other categories of planting and expansion that we touched on, including how to prioritize different planting areas. And we actually have a resource in our appendix that also highlights that, and I can go over that in a little bit too. And lastly, for our last category, maintenance of trees, we ended up for this plan largely highlighting recommendations for public trees, because maintenance of trees, rests on the property owner. And in the case of this plan and its target use, which is largely our municipal members, that's where the bulk of our recommendations end up falling under, as well as the fact that public funding, for tree maintenance is also typically dedicated to public trees. So there's a large, that was kind of a large driver into this chapter. But I know we all know that tree maintenance is essential to sustaining a healthy and resilient urban forest, and that consistent funding is still a challenge for many of our cities and towns, and that the cost of maintaining can be a barrier. And so in this plan, we really emphasize, we also added a really big emphasis on the importance of education and outreach to support kind of the whole watershed-wide approach to tree stewardship. So kind of everyone having a role in that. And so what you see in this table for the top two on this table are our general maintenance recommendations around increasing public awareness of tree benefits and biology through different avenues, but also adopting a heritage tree program, which can include both public and private trees to help foster stewardship. And the rest of the recommendations on the list are largely focused for our public trees. So thinking about a city or town having a proactive maintenance program instead of a more reactive one. Some highlights on ensuring that a town or city, has set up funding streams such as a tree fund that may be included as part of your tree ordinance or bylaw so that you do have maintenance funding and capacity. Some other stuff that we had highlighted for some of our municipalities are in our upper and middle watershed where they do have a uh, existing, tree canopy that might fall under, private management or public management, but thinking about trees that could also have a town forest management plan, which functions a little bit similarly to an urban forest plan, but specific for a parcel that has your town forest. And similar to our other chapters, we also have case study, highlighting private-public partnership for maintenance on private properties in this case. And this one we specifically highlighted the Tree Resilient program, which is a partnership of a number of different organizations, including the Nature Conservancy, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Davy Tree Expert Company, and local governments and nonprofits, where they collaborate to help fund maintenance and healthcare for existing private trees, and also stump removal and site preparation, specifically in low income and low canopy neighborhoods. And so that's kind of maybe a quick overview of our recommendations, but I also wanted to highlight additional resources that we've included in our appendix. And so what you can find in our appendix, we compiled a long list of resources that you can use as you work through the plan or as you take it and think about how to apply it in your community. We have a list of tools that you could explore in terms of assessing your own tree canopy. We have resource on general best practices for tree planting programs, a compilation of available documents, that are published around species that are adapted to climate change. And we have a table that we've put together showcasing examples from other municipalities and how they prioritize planting or expansion targets in their community, that you can take a look at the summary level as well as linking out to the full plan. And similar to what Ari showed in terms of her tree matrix, we have our Appendix F. It's a larger overview of all our municipalities, but also tracking what tree-related policies or other adjacent regulations each town in our watershed has adopted that contributes to the protection as well as the expansion of trees in our watershed. And with that, I will close with thank yous to our project team members, including our consultant, corporate environmental, and members of our technical advisory committee, which you can see here, and others who we have interviewed along the way. And of course, all of you for coming to our webinars. And if you've taken our surveys, we've taken a lot of what you've given us, and that has helped serve, a lot of the work that we put together for this plan. And with that, I think we can open it up for questions. I didn't see any questions in the chat from my end. I don't know if you did, Ari, but also feel free, like Fred, to raise your hand and
We did
unmute.
have one question that I got in the chat that I can read out here. Do we have any materials and information about establishing a heritage tree program in MA, and what other communities in MA have them?
Yeah, great question. In our plan, we do cover, I believe we do have an example linking up to the Heritage Tree Program. I think in our research, it was, there's a various ways that folks kind of adopt a heritage tree program. It might specifically say heritage tree, might be legacy tree. Some folks have different kind of descriptions that fall under that. But yes, we do have some links in our plan around that. Um, all right. Shall we take live questions? Maybe start with you, Fred.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned earlier on that the heaviest tree canopy loss in the 2008 to 2021 study, you believe occurred from 2012 to 2017. Did I hear that right? And can you elaborate on how you came up with that and what the data was?
Yeah, so the data that we were using was available data from the Forest Service. And at the time we completed our existing conditions report, it was only up to 2021. And I believe, I'm just looking at our report, trying to find our report really quickly. But there was available data for each year between 2008 and 2021. And that's where, as we were doing the analysis, looking at canopy change over those years, that's where we saw the largest kind of loss across most of our municipalities. I'll also open it up. I know Chad and Claire are here. If you guys want to chime in on anything, feel free to also add. But did that help answer your question, Fred?
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is I thought you only had measurements of canopy at 2 points in time, and therefore we don't know whether all we know is the average loss, and that we didn't know whether the rate of loss was accelerating or decelerating or steady. And so, if you can elaborate on that, that would be interesting. And do you have any theory as to why that period was, did it have something to do with uh, interest rates for new construction, something spurring the construction industry, or what's the theory on why that was the heaviest period?
Yeah, great question. For your last question, in terms of theory, I don't think we were really able to go into that much detail. And so that's something that would we would love to kind of figure out, maybe be able to dive a little bit deeper on. But in terms of, the what available data we were able to use, the map that showed existing conditions was only for the 2021 data that was available through the Forest Service. But in terms of looking through the change, the U.S. Forest Service has data for every year between 2008 and 2021. And so we were using all of those data to look at the change in canopy and look at where some of that acceleration and the big changes in tree loss was happening. And you can actually find, after this webinar, we'll share out some of our resources, but our story map does do a really great example and mapping of that change over time. All right. Next question, Sean, I see your hand up.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting introduction to some of CRWA's efforts. I've been familiar with the organization for a long time, but less so with the particular work on tree protection. And I've got a couple of comments and questions because I've been very much involved in these efforts here in the town of Brookline. And in fact, spent much of the morning talking to senior town staff about tree protection and how to make it work and some of the issues. I'll just make one comment on the whole question of canopy loss. In terms of making that real to people, it helps to go beyond the percentages and talk about the number of football fields that are lost. So it's really something that people can visualize, and it's just not abstract. And to remind people, it doesn't happen in huge chunks. Often it's one tree at a time. And every time someone's saying it's just one tree, they add up. They add up to dozens and dozens of football fields of tree canopy that are gone, quite often forever. But that's just a general comment. I've got 3 comments or questions related to our experience in Brookline, where we adopted a new tree preservation bylaw a little over a year ago. I'm not sure if it's actually reflected in your table, because it extended protection to private property in a fairly significant way. And there's some interesting issues and problems we've had. First of all, our town council, our lawyer for the town, said that it was unconstitutional and it was an illegal taking of private property, even though it was modeled on many, many similar ordinances in Massachusetts and around the country. And he said, if anyone takes this to court, it will be struck down immediately, no question. The town meeting vote was overwhelming in favor of it anyway, but that's sort of a sword of Damocles hanging over our tree protection bylaw, tree preservation bylaw as it's technically called. And I don't know if any other communities have faced this sort of legal opinion from their own in-house staff or challenges that have struck down tree protection bylaws. My second comment is we have a tremendous problem making the case for tree protection because we're faced with much opposition on the grounds that climate change is a big problem and the best way to combat it is to build very high density housing, not to save trees. And saving trees just increases the cost of housing, and it's a luxury we can't afford. And the call is for to build buildings with a lower carbon footprint, and studies, according to the proponents at this point, they said this is far more effective than tree protection. I'm working very hard to counter this with the full litany of tree benefits that were in a slide earlier in the presentation, and saying it's not just about climate change, but it's very hard to make this argument because the housing advocates are so concerned about the high cost of housing and climate change that they never stop with this, trees help, but what really helps is build, build, build. We need a lot of new buildings to help fight climate change. And trees just get in the way. And third, we're having a tremendous problem funding our private tree preservation bylaw. It's taking a lot of staff and it doesn't bring in money. There are fines associated with tree removal, but it's sort of the good news and bad news situation. Not many people are paying those fines because they're preserving the trees. So no money is coming in to fund the many staff positions that are required just to administer a tree preservation bylaw in a community of 64,000 people. So those are some of the issues that we're having, and I welcome any help or just comments. And if you just want to take these as comments and thoughts about some of the difficulties and move on, that's fine. But these issues have really been on my mind for much of the day. And as I said, town staff were briefing me on all of the difficulties they were having implementing our tree preservation bylaw and extending it from the public to the private trees.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments and questions. I don't know, Ari, if you had anything.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key resources that is kind of unknown, but maybe known by town staff and stuff like that, is that the state attorney general's office actually has a municipal bylaw decision portal on their website where if a bylaw is passed, so say Brookline's bylaw is passed in town meeting, it actually goes to their office and they write kind of a legal,
I followed that extremely closely. I read all of those reports we get back from the attorney general's office, but to cut to the chase, our town council said, yes, that's all well and good that they approved our bylaw, but that doesn't address the constitutional question that he says is paramount. The AGO doesn't get involved in that. And he said, this is going to be struck down as completely unconstitutional.
Yeah, I will say I haven't experienced this in many other cases on our end, but that is something we can kind of take back and get back to you and see if there is anything with our legal director who's on staff.
And I will say, just as a footnote, the leading proponent of our tree preservation bylaw is the former town council who preceded the incumbent lawyer for the town. And so it's an interesting case. Lawyers disagree.
Right. And Fred, before you, I think, respond to that, I've also opened up the chat for folks to share and to everyone else, just in case other folks did not want to come off mute and wanted to share any other thoughts in response to Sean's questions and other questions as well. But yeah, Fred, did you have any other thoughts to add or questions to that? Oh.
Well, yeah, I first was going to try to write to Sean in the chat to thank him for his sharing his experience, but thank you for opening up the chat. No, I think these are important complications or challenges that he's mentioned, and I guess I'm wondering if Brookline is not collecting many fees, does that mean that the bylaw is so far very successful and in changing the decision making of people doing development? So, and maybe Sean doesn't have an answer to that, but that would be a good thing if it's true.
Too early to say.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And Sean, I see people have some questions for you in the chat if you would like to take a look at them. But I did also get another question on elaborating the meaning of MVP in the tree protection chart. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Heidi, but were you referencing the Climate Resilience 101 tool chart or one of our recommendations?
Yeah, thank you. I'm noticing that the matrix is developed. It says as a tool to track and assess the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program. And I guess I'm not familiar with that grant program, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. And I'm wondering if you can just elaborate so that as we read the chart, we can make sure to understand MVP typically it means the opposite. I think.
Yeah, I think Ari, is that your table? Do you have a column on MVP?
Yeah, so one of the columns in that bylaw matrix is just basically to see if a town has put together, which most towns have, a municipal vulnerability preparedness plan that happened, I believe, in around 2020, where the state kind of put it out to cities and towns to put together this specific plan. Majority of towns have that plan. It did open up the opportunity for more grant funding from them through the state, I believe. I believe Needham has one specifically.
Sure. I guess I'm just wondering, is that specific to trees or does it address stormwater generally?
It addresses an array of things. It can address stormwater, it can address flooding. It's just specifically to identify whether they have this plan where it addresses a bunch of things in place.
Okay, thank you.
Claire.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you, Dara. You did a great job. This is really exciting. And the report looks amazing. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the example in Cambridge. Cambridge is kind of an affluent and well-educated community. And when they right-sized their tree ordinance for their community, they really went all in for protection. And they just released a new report. They have data from the first 5 or 6 years of having this tree ordinance that shows that they have overall increase their tree canopy cover by 5% through their both tree protection and planting efforts. But then the other thing I wanted to say to Sean was just that I think it's often presented as a false choice between housing or trees, or parking or trees, or it's really I think the most successful bylaws tend to be flexible enough to let projects go forward without major impacts, which might mean collecting more money and not protecting as many trees. But balancing that with taking those funds and using them not just to administer the paperwork generated by the law, but to care for the rest of the urban forest and to help those newly planted trees get really well established, so that when they start hitting their real growth spurt of their teen years, that they have a robust root system and they're just ready to take off, because they'll be more resistant to the stress of the urban environment and pest and disease at that time of their life anyway. So we're getting a younger tree canopy, which is sort of a mixed blessing. I hope that's helpful.
I'll look at the Cambridge report.
Cambridge has has 2 full-time arborists on staff, one of whom spends maybe 80% of her time, I believe, administering their tree protection ordinance. But it is true that the companies have learned it exists and residents are now aware of it more broadly, and it seems to be accepted. But I think where people get in danger is if they overreach and stop the development of housing, or people get upset because they had planned to do something with their real estate that they can no longer do. And then you'd see it be a taking and make its way up. I mean, hopefully he's wrong.
Great. Ari, I don't know if did anyone else some questions for you, or
yeah, I can answer the we got a question of, do local tree ordinances take a different approach to pocket forests, mostly volunteer rather than deliberately planted trees growing along the side and back property lines compared to the individual trees, the individual trees? I can say from what I've reviewed and within our watershed specifically, I have not seen a different approach taken for these pocket forests. It is mainly just a different delineated usually between private trees or public trees, and having those type of set of restrictions on those ends.
I'll just add, a lot of those little microforests, if they're not planted, would be invasive species. And one of the decisions that towns often make is to exclude invasive species from protection, because you're literally not allowed to go buy one at a nursery in Massachusetts. If you have a Norway maple and you remove it, you're not allowed to buy another one. So I think that it's a mixed question. There's urban wilds programs in more urbanized areas like in Boston. But those little scraps of land, sometimes they're protected and sometimes they're not,
All right.
So I guess the answer is no. Yeah, no, sorry.
No worries, Claire. Thanks for jumping in. Any other questions from folks? I don't see any other in the chat coming up.
I got one more question in the chat, and then it's, are invasive, kind of goes with the last one, are invasives more climate resilient than native trees?
I mean, that you could have another webinar discussion on that question. It's a really good question. There are certainly, they generally come to us from more southerly regions, so you might think that would be the case. They do outcompete our native plants generally by leafing out earlier and by casting shade on the slowpoke native trees who never had to compete with these guys before. So from a biodiversity standpoint, they're certainly less desirable. And many of them grow really rapidly, so they have weak branch unions and tend to fall apart more easily. So I guess it's better than no canopy at all. But
Great, thanks, Claire. Fred, did you have another question or wanted to add to that?
Well, very quickly, does Cambridge have a heritage tree program, and is it separate and independent of the bylaw, or is it woven into the bylaw?
I don't recall. That's I know they have a lot of information on their website that you could probably find that answer in readily.
Okay.
They're and then I'm sure if you called them up, they would chat about their program. They're very helpful.
Yes, good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right. Oh, I see another hand raised. Deborah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My understanding of the Heritage Tree Program through the DCR is that those are trees only on public land. So if you have a champion white oak on your property, it's unlikely to be placed on the heritage tree list because it's not on publicly accessible or public land. It's just a little clarification about what a heritage tree does, or how it can be designated as, how a tree can be designated as a heritage tree.
This is for the state administered heritage tree program, but my sense is that some towns have or are considering making their own designation. But thanks for that clarification. That's important.
Yeah, here in Lincoln, we've talked with the DCR about making a heritage tree program, or sort of tracking down whatever heritage trees we can find, and then possibly making a list for Lincoln. And we've landed on the idea of not using the term heritage tree because that's kind of already taken by the state, but using instead notable trees, because we want to look at what trees might what might mature into great specimens eventually, what might be great specimens, or what might be notable for, say, we've got a sassafras colony in town, which is unusual, and it's kind of cool to see that, but it's not anything you could call a heritage tree or a heritage colony. It just doesn't exist like that. So we're trying to put together our own notable tree program, and with the aim of opening people's eyes to the value and to the value of trees, and the value and the sort of character and desirability of having a wide diversity of trees in town, whether it's on private land or public land. We want people to be awake to trees. That's all.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And yes, that's a good thing to know. And you know, like I said, for our maintenance, part of our maintenance recommendation around heritage tree was largely focused on increasing the awareness and education for folks. So, you know, if you know whether it's heritage tree or a different label, I think through our research, Claire, we had seen other folks using like legacy tree or another program, you know, labeling it as a legacy tree. But kind of helping foster that if you have a really large tree that kind of falls in that category, and having that designation could foster that, you know, awareness, as well as a bit more ownership and you know, maybe being proud of the tree that you have on your property. And then there's something else I was going to add, but now I've forgotten.
I think in that resilience model that you shared earlier, there's some care available to the veteran trees that are identified through the program on private property, which is a real sort of new area of support, because unknown large, you know, potential future costs are a real disincentive to growing or having a big tree on your property if you have a limited budget. So It's a great innovation.
Hmm.
And I guess heritage trees are really designated so to help engage the community, so that as I forget, I think it was Deborah said that the trees are seen and appreciated more, because the care that we're going to need for all these trees we plant in the droughts that we're going to face with the the increasing impacts of our changing climate. We're going to need all the people watering our trees that we can find, and if they develop an appreciation for them, they're more likely to help care for them.
And I'm just going to jump in with one more question that was directly chatted for me for guidance on the protection of mature trees when utility companies prune aggressively for clearance. In regards to kind of within a tree bylaw or tree protection ordinances, usually we recommend towns and cities to implement a permit process so that a tree warden actually has to go out and inspect what they're doing, going through that. So it really is specific town by town, but making sure the town has a permit system of tracking and figuring out what's going who is touching trees within a specific town is kind of the main way to help fight that protection.
Right. Yeah, and then I think we have some other language in our plan around, even adding on top to that, just best practices around maintenance, or I think a big focus in some of our recommendations is just communicating across departments in a municipality, and making sure that even though a staff is not responsible for a tree per se, that they're very much aware of what the practices are, and who, to potentially go to if that ever needs, if they have questions around that. All right, I'm looking at time. We have a minute left. I just wanted to make sure you all are aware of how to contact Ari and I if you have any questions about trees, helping, maybe partnering on any projects or programs, or needing some additional resources and guidance on your own local tree work. You can find our emails up here. You can always go to our websites as well at www.crwa.org. As a follow-up, we will send everyone a link to the recorded webinar, and we will also be linking out all of the resources that we mentioned in today's talk.